let's get this started.
We're good, okay.
I'm so thrilled on behalf of Salt City Comic Con to host and moderate this interview with Mark Waid.
Hello, sir.
Mark, as guest of honor, we're just thrilled to have you here in Syracuse. So thanks for coming.
Applaud. This is where you're supposed to applaud. Go ahead and applaud. All right, that's good. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, fantastic. Mark, you've been doing this for quite a while.
Quite a while.
I think it's been a long time since you've been to this part of the country.
It has. It's been like 20 years since I've been to this part of the country.
Wow.
I think we were doing Kingdom Come tour last time we were here. So yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's so good to have you back. We hope you get to enjoy a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Central New York is working hard to rejuvenate itself and rebrand itself. And here in Central New York and Syracuse in particular, we've got a very robust comic shop community.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a lot of conventions popping up. It's all very good.
Cool.
Good. Well, what I'd love to do, Mark, is kind of dive into some in your long career, some things that are kind of fun, some things that personal point of interest.
Sure.
And I'd love to get your overview of the entire industry and some of the big issues that you grapple with.
Sure.
Yeah. First of all, I know that you're working in a new capacity with Humanoids.
Right.
And this is a huge launch. We all saw what you did on Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about this and what it's all about?
Sure. Humanoids is a French publisher. It's been around forever. They did a lot of Mobius's stuff. They did a book called The Inkle, which is one of the greatest selling graphic novels overseas of all time.
Right.
And they've been doing French albums and French books. They wanted to break into the American market, so they called me up as somebody who knows and has worked for everyone and has done everything in any capacity, from owning a store to editing to publishing to writing to everything. And they brought me in as a director of creative development. And so we talked about what they wanted to launch was a line of 3 books that are interconnected, kind of, but you can certainly read them individually. You'll get a little bit more out of them if you read them all.
Yeah.
But they're not exactly superhero books. Nobody's in costumes, nobody's in capes. They're not necessarily all good guys, but there's an event in the world that happens that triggers superpowers in certain people.
Yeah.
But the idea is to make it a lot more socially relevant. I mean, the reason that I got involved to begin with was my book, which is called Ignited.
Yes.
Is the pitch to me was basically, what if the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas kids, what if the Parkland kids got superpowers?
Right.
What would they do?
Yeah, all the kids from the school shooting.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that is a personal. That's a personal hot button for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have kids, but I am appalled that we, as a country, we haven't been able to do anything about this. So having teenage kids who, honestly, they don't necessarily know the best thing to do either, but that's kind of the part of the joy of writing the story, is kind of watching them try to figure out how to go about making change.
Yeah.
So there are 2 other books. There's Omni, which is about a super smart African-American doctor. It's written by Devin Grayson. And there is a book called Strangelands, which is about a couple who aren't related, but they both have the last name Lands, but they're not related, and they're going around the country trying to find out what's happening with these powers and where they come from. And that's written by Max Visaggio, who's a big name, getting a big name out there, and Darcy Little Badger, who is an Indian, Native American woman who is one of the best first-time writers I've ever seen. So anyway, so that's the fun of working there. And I go in the office maybe once a week and work with the books. I know how to solve problems because I've seen everything in 35 years. So that's sort of my job, is to go in every week and put out the little fires. But I'm excited about what they're launching. And we launched Ignited last month. I think issue 2 came out just this week.
Right.
And we're very proud of that. And doing something about school shootings is obviously a hot button topic and very sensitive topic.
Sure.
And we were very mindful about not in any way coming across as exploitative, as taking advantage of a situation that, and not taking it seriously. One of the things we've done that I'm very proud of is that You remember a couple of months ago at Seattle, there was another school shooting, and they had an assembly the next day with all the kids and politicians and stuff, and the politicians kept talking and the kids weren't allowed to talk, and so they all got up and walked out. That was in the news, and that struck me that day, and that immediately gave me the idea I want to reach out and contact as many of the survivors of these things as I can and let them talk to us through our pages. So in our editorial pages, we're running letters, pieces, think pieces, whatever. I just opened it up to a bunch of people who've survived these things over the last 20 years and said, say whatever you want to say. It's your voice. Just do whatever you want to do. And so I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. Now, of course, you know, Mark Waid, no stranger to controversy. Is that an understatement? Two sides to every issue. Have you found any resistance to, you know, what on the surface seems like a very noble cause and noble topic? Has there been resistance thus far?
Not yet, but you know, no one on Fox News has found us yet. When they do, I'm sure we'll hit resistance. But you know, but it's not necessarily an anti-gun platform. It's not an anti-NRA platform necessarily. We have 6 kids in the book. Not all 6 kids think the same way. Not all 6 kids have groupthink. They all want this madness to stop. Some of them are very anti-NRA. Some of them are just about mental health and what we can do there. You know, so it's really sort of examining the issue from all angles.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, just from a comic book point of view, you're working with artists, one very, very familiar name, and some newer folks to most fans as well. The art is just lovely.
Thank you. It's a Phil Brayonis. Yeah, he's doing a really nice job. And Andrew Dahlhaus is doing the colors. Really nice stuff. Andrew Hennessy, Jesus Christ. All right, anyway, yes, I'm sorry.
No, we'll edit
Cut
this part out.
Cut that. Cut that, okay.
Yeah. How about this one? You launched at Free Comic Book Day. Can you talk a little bit about what the reaction was initially?
Boy, it was really good. I mean, when you start a line of comics, even a publisher like Humanoids who's known, we're not known for monthly comic books, so it's a real dicey proposition.
Sure.
Getting attention from the retailers is really tough. And again, as a former retailer, I got to tell you, I don't know how many of you actually see the catalog that comes out every month that the retailers have to order from, but it's like a Midtown phone book. I mean, it's 500 pages long, so to be able to stand out and make any attention and get any sort of traction if you're not DC or Marvel is really hard.
Sure.
But we had a really good looking Free Comic Book Day book.
Yeah.
It was all new material. It wasn't reprints of stuff. It wasn't a sampler of different things. And it had a complete story in it. And I think people were intrigued. We got a lot of good feedback on it.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. Yeah, it's astounding when you think of someone like Humanoids, who worldwide folks understand them as an important publisher, but domestically, many comic fans just not on the radar. No,
I honestly, not many people have read the Inkle over here, whereas overseas it's like Watchmen.
Right, everyone knows it there.
Yeah,
fantastic. How about a little closer to home, and if that's one of the things you're working on now, I'm very interested when you're at a cocktail party and someone asks you about, your professional journey.
Yeah.
And where you've started and some of the things you've done, and how do you describe that, when you don't have 4 hours to
exactly.
Discuss that?
I started the same way everybody here who wants to be in comics started. I worked at conventions.
Yeah.
I was a volunteer. I would get people at the airport and bring them in and make sure, kind of watch and handle them and so forth. And in doing so, networked. I mean, not intentionally. I wasn't pushy or anything like that. I wasn't sure I was too afraid to be really pushy, but I was getting to know people. I was getting to know editors. I was getting to know other writers. I was making friends with, some of the hot writers back then. And once they know you, then I got to, get a little bit of attention from them. I worked in the fan press. I worked in a magazine called Amazing Heroes, which was sort of like the Wizard magazine of its day, except that's not Wizard magazine isn't around anymore. So it's like
nobody even knows that reference anymore.
It's like the comic book resources of the day, except it was on paper.
Yeah.
And working there allowed me to talk to all kind of industry professionals. So I was an editor there, and I got a call from DC Comics in '87 wanting to know if I wanted to come aboard as an editor.
Yeah.
And couldn't get out there fast enough.
Right.
Went out there as an editor.
And you love DC Comics as a fan.
Says that was my jam. That was when I was a kid. I lived in the deep South, so Marvel Comics didn't have a lot of circulation. There weren't a whole lot of Marvel Comics out there to be found. DCs were everywhere, and so I just fell in love from the Batman TV show. I fell in love with Batman, and then moved on from there in the 60s. So, when I got the job as an editor at DC, it was my dream job because I never wanted to be a writer. I had no ambition of being a writer whatsoever. None.
Crazy.
I just wanted to be an editor. That was my dream job. Because I figured that way, because I couldn't imagine how you could come up with story after story after story, month after month. That was just incomprehensible to me.
Holy smokes.
So, but working there as an editor and working on their anthology titles, like Secret Origins and a few of the other ones, I was working with every writer in comics. So all of these scripts would come across my desk every month, and it was a crash course. I learned, because I'm reading everyone's scripts. So I learned more in those 2 years I was an editor than I could have in 10 years on my own.
Wow. And just as a reminder, Secret Origins was like an anthology book where different writers would write about characters and how they started every month.
Exactly, yeah. So, and it's like I said, I worked with everyone in comics, and from Neil Gaiman. I was one of Neil Gaiman's first editors. I was, working with a lot of guys. And so when I left editorial, I had made enough friends on staff that wanted to keep me alive and out of the bread lines. So they, fed me an assignment here, an assignment there. And I eventually landed Flash as my first real regular assignment that was all mine. And I've just been incredibly lucky because ever since, I've never had to pick up the phone. I've never had to knock on doors. I've never had to look for work since then.
Wow.
And that is some talent, but that is also a lot of luck.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good I think one of the reasons I'm able to keep going is because I have worked in every other aspect.
Yeah.
As an editor, as a publisher, so I've worked every side of every desk, so I understand your job.
Yes.
If I'm working for you as a freelancer and you're my editor, I understand your job in a way that a lot of other writers don't. And I understand my job. I understand the kind of problems that you need me to solve.
Right.
So I think that is a big help. I think that is as much as anything the reason that I've been able to, after like 35 years, still stay in comics.
Yeah, right. I always am impressed. I always hear a thread of like humility is too simplistic. I think you come across as a humble guy, even though you have a great talent at your craft. But you also seem to always talk about the different things you've done and also the amount of work that you put into things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're going to go big. I mean, go in. And I love comics. I love comics, and I've done a lot of creator-owned stuff over the years. That's mine.
Yeah.
And I will continue to, but it's different. It's not a lot of people get into comics doing franchise characters, Superman, Spider-Man, whatever, because ultimately they want to be able to tell their own stories and do their own stuff. And I'm the opposite. I like doing my own stuff here and there, but it's not the big draw for me. The big draw for me is I love these characters.
Yeah.
I love these characters that I loved when I was a kid, and whatever I can do to give back to those characters and be able to say I put some stamp on the mythos.
Yeah.
To be able to say I contributed something to the overall history of the character, that's what is the fun thing for me.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting because with your career, of course, you put your fingerprints in a significant way on many characters. Yeah. I remember a couple of years ago when you were doing Dr. Spectre for Dynamite.
Yeah. And
you talked about, I haven't done anything with this character, and it's one of the few characters I wasn't really cognizant of as a kid, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have this conversation at Marvel every couple of years now, which is when I go off a book and look for something else to do, Tom Brevoort, who's the executive editor, and I sit down and we go, what's left? What have you not done?
Right.
At this point, I've never written Wonder Woman, I've never written Thor, I've never written Iron Man, and that's pretty much the list, and Thor and Wonder Woman have no appeal to me. I think they're great characters, but
really? Yeah.
I'm a science kid. I grew up as a science kid.
Yeah.
I was never into mythology. I was never into that sort of stuff. So I appreciate Thor, I appreciate Wonder Woman. They're great characters. great movies, but there's nothing I can bring to the table.
How fascinating. Yeah, well, I think like recently you started working on Doctor Strange.
Which was, again, completely out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, that seemed like a non-Mark Waid-y character.
And that's why I took it. I took it specifically because, okay, it's magic, it's mysticism. That's something I've never touched on.
Right.
And it's something I don't know a lot about. So to be able to dive in and do the research and really look into magic and how magic ostensibly works, that was an education for me.
Yeah.
And it's been a lot of fun. And also, Stephen Strange is a great character to work with because he's such a jerk sometimes. I mean, I don't know if people know the origin of Doctor Strange, but he was this insanely arrogant surgeon who was the best surgeon in the world. Completely arrogant, jerk, and got in a car accident, lost the use of his hands, couldn't operate anymore, now on Skid Row, looking for some way back, and he goes to this ancient temple in the mountains, looking for some sort of, and the ancient one magician gives him spiritual awakening and teaches him how to embrace the spiritual side of himself, and he becomes, the world's greatest sorcerer.
Yeah, kind of a second career though.
Second
right?
career,
yeah.
and learns a lot about humility, but in my mind, there's still a little bit of arrogance there, and that's kind of fun to write.
Yeah. Now you did some interesting things with that book, like bring him to space and other Sorcerer Supremes, and that seemed very innovative looking at it from the outside.
Yeah, when I take on a book, the first thing I try to, there are two things. First thing I do is I go back and look at the original concept of the character, and go back to the roots and read the first stories, because those are always the truest stories. Those are always where you find the real heart of the character. And then I try desperately to think of an angle that you've never seen before. And with Doctor Strange, it was, okay, there's magic on Earth, obviously, but there's also it's magic on other worlds. He wakes up one morning, he has no magic anymore, he doesn't know why, and he has no idea how to connect to magic, and he goes to Tony Stark, Iron Man, who says, well, you're looking too small. I mean, look, there's magic out there too. I mean, other worlds must have Sorcerer Supremes, other alien races must have magic. Go look for it there. And so we did this whole story arc of him out in space dealing with alien magicians.
Yeah, funny, clever. I think a lot of that was in even this issue, right?
Yeah.
This first issue. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.
So much fun. Now, sometimes you've taken multiple bites of the apple for characters. Like Captain America seems like you've done more than one run.
I've done 4. I got 4 bites of the apple.
Wow.
And you never do that. Like you should never do that. First off, like I learned this with Flash.
Yes.
Never go back.
Oh, did that not work for you, or you were?
It did not go well. Everybody forgets I did a 6-issue run on Flash, like right before the New 52 stuff or whatever, and it wasn't well received because I was trying to do something different that wasn't like the Flash stuff I did in the last 100 issues I did.
Yeah, that was such a long run.
And the thing is, when you go back to something that you did in the past, you're not only competing with, you're competing with not only what you did, you're competing with people's memories of what you did. You're competing with their nostalgia of what they remember that is good about what you did.
Yeah. Right.
So whatever you do, it's really hard to come back. In Captain America's case specifically, 4 bites of the apple. Ron Garney and I did the book for 11 issues.
Yeah, that was so fun.
And then without knowing that Marvel was about to give all their superhero characters over to Image Comics to do for a year. So they did that stuff for a year, and the books were, they sold pretty well, but on a creative level, they were sort of not really well received. And they came back to Marvel, and so I was given my choice of, do I want to do Avengers? Do I want to do Iron Man? Do I want to do what? And I wanted to do Captain America with Ron again, and pick up where we left. And so we did another 25 issues or so.
Yeah.
And Ron wanted to go on to do something else, and I like working with Ron, so I went off that thinking I would never go back to Captain America.
Yeah.
And then
he's one of your favorites.
Absolutely, he's one of my favorites. When I first got the assignment, I was working pretty much exclusively at DC. I wasn't contracted exclusively, but that was where I was doing stuff. And I got a phone call one day, and it was a message from Ralph Macchio, who was the editor there, and he said, I want to talk to you about an assignment, left a message. And all I could think all night was, well, it better be Captain America, because if it's not, I'm not terribly interested, because I like the Marvel characters, but I don't love them the way I love the DC characters, which has changed since I've been writing Marvels for the last 20 years.
Interesting.
But, so sure enough, it was Captain America. And so I love that character. I love the patriotism. I love the shield. I love the can-do attitude. I love the fact that he's smarter than everybody else in the room, not in terms of intelligence, but in terms of just knowing what to do next.
Yeah, sure.
So
you're good with supporting characters. His girlfriend, Sharon Carter.
Oh, first thing I did was bring Sharon Carter back. Yeah, because she'd been dead in the comics for like 15 years, and she had the worst death in comics. She wasn't even on camera.
No,
it was just
videotape.
Somebody showed Cap a videotape of Sharon Carter being killed, and that was it for Sharon Carter for 15 years. And that's, please, like nothing ever happened on videotape that was fake. So, so brought her back, and then the third bite of the apple was when we did. Tom Brevoort challenged me to do a mini series that was set right after Cap came out of the ice.
Right.
And right after he emerged, after years and years of suspended animation, and what is a modern retelling of that world and with the post 9/11 world.
Right.
How does Captain America function in a world like that? If you're in the Marvel universe and there's time travel easily accessible, why don't you just go back to the moment that you went into deep freeze? Right, so I was able to answer all those questions and really get deep into Captain. And I thought that was it. I swore that was it for Captain America. I would never go back. And then Chris Samnee and I did Daredevil for like 36 issues.
Yeah.
Love working with Chris. Dream job. And he called me one day and said, I'm running out of ways to draw radar sense. I'm running out of things visually to do with Daredevil that are new to me.
Yeah.
I need to move on. So what else do you want to do? He says, well, we talked about a bunch of different things, and Captain America came open.
Right.
They knew at that point they were going to go to Ta-Nehisi Coates to do the series, but he needed some lead time.
Right.
So he said, okay, we'll do 6 issues. We'll jump in there. And so that was a great deal of fun. I wouldn't have done it without the cushion of Chris, because I figured even if you hated what I did or didn't think it was as good as what I did before, at least you're going to love Chris.
Yeah, that's great. And in this series, I think you have that bit that, one of those things that chokes up all the fanboys. Where you talk about, the weak protect the strong protect the weak.
Yeah.
That's the rule. It's like brilliant. Like,
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about that.
That's really it. That's what Captain America is to me. That is the rule is that if you have the ability to protect other people, and when I say the strong protect the weak, that's the rule. It doesn't mean that certain classes of people are always weak. Everybody's strong in a different way at a different time.
Sure.
If you have the strength in the moment, it is your responsibility to look after people who are weaker than you, who are less fortunate than you in that moment. And I believe that to my core. And I believe that is what Cap believes. I believe I had to really zero in on what he believed. That had a story arc in here where he is catapulted, he thinks, into the far future. And it turns out it's like 2026. But the world's a dystopia. Something horrible happened and he has been on ice. And he has to articulate to this new generation what he stood for. And I looked in the Declaration of Independence, I looked in the Constitution, and I looked for those, but I couldn't quite figure out how to translate, how Captain America would translate that. It was the Bill of Rights. That's what Captain America stands for, is the Bill of Rights. That, basically flat out, all men created equal, and this is what we stand for. These are the rights of Americans. And once I realized that was a new revelation for me on Cap. But I love writing Steve Rogers, and under the right circumstances, I might take a dip in that again. I don't know.
Yeah, good for you. That's
you.
Great. Now, I'd love to explore a little bit about the collaboration that you had with Samnee.
Sure.
And maybe even we'll go before that. So DC is relaunching all their books.
Right.
And they're kind of creating a new backstory. And at that same time, you were doing that for character Daredevil.
Yeah.
right? And you know, we've all joked like, oh yeah, the best DC reboot was the Daredevil. You know, at that time, right?
Yeah.
So you figured out a way to keep the old and refresh it.
Yeah.
You started off with another fella, Paulo, very talented.
Yeah.
And then you continued with Samney.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that, and especially the artistic collaboration.
Sure. I mean, it was one of the greatest artistic collaborations I've ever had.
Yeah.
I always say it's a collaboration. Comics, I always say, it's when I write it, it's my story until such time as I give it to the artist, at which point it is our story. And it is a straight up collaboration. I can't dictate what you draw. I shouldn't dictate what you draw. You're going to bring your own sensibilities as a cinematographer, as a director into the artwork. And working with Chris was a dream because he and I thought along the same lines. We both enjoyed the same sorts of adventures. We both felt emotional about the same things.
Yeah.
And we both liked doing something new. And with Daredevil, it was new in a sense. That Daredevil, when he started out, was a swashbuckling, you know, joyous character, and then Frank Miller came along in the late 70s, early 80s,
Sure.
and did a brilliant run of Daredevil, and a really brilliant, sort of dark, edgy run of Daredevil that was terrific, and I loved when I was growing up. And unfortunately, everyone since then has done Frank, has done, even Bendis, who was terrific on the book,
Yeah.
still did the very dark, ominous Daredevil, and we had to take a stiff drink after every issue.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
And when they asked me to do Daredevil, I said, I can only do this. I'm not being defiant. I'm just saying I can't do that because that's not something I'm comfortable doing. I don't like writing those kind of stories.
Yeah. You seem more of an optimist as a person or as a creator.
Right. I just have no use. I have no use for cynicism. I have no use for cynicism whatsoever. I believe that, especially for superhero characters, they're created to be positive.
Yeah.
They're created to make the world a better place and to be selfless as much as they can.
Sure.
And so that's the attitude I went into the book with. And when Somni came along, I will remember this to the day I die. The same day, I accepted an assignment to do a Rocketeer miniseries for IDW.
Yeah, right.
And at that same time, and so they called me, Scott Dunby at IDW called me and said, okay, we got this guy, we need Chris Somni, we want to make him an offer. And that same day, Stephen Wacker called me and said, hey, I'm looking at a guy for Daredevil, his name is Chris Somni. And I'm thinking, well, this is a win-win, but it's also a lose-lose because I don't want him to not do, which is he going to pick?
Yeah.
So I called him up and said, what are you going to do? And this is before he had 3 kids.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is when he was really hungry and starting out. He said, I'm going to do both. And he did do both, and they were great. Now I can't get him to do a book a month, but, you know, but back then he was willing to dive in. And so working with him became, it was full script at first. Here's the full script. Here's the dialogue. Here's the artwork descriptions. Here's what I want you to do, and change whatever you need to change. But as we got into it, it became a lot looser.
Yeah.
It became here's dialogue that I want to get across. Here's the mood of the scene, but lay it out however you want. You know, pace it however you want. Do your thing.
Yeah.
And then I would go back and do a dialogue pass and go, oh well, I don't need to say this, or I don't need to say this anymore, or whatever. It's all in the art.
Oh, interesting.
So that was just a perfect collaboration.
Would you say you were using your editor's skills at that point, or were you almost like pulling back and more just handing it over to your collaborator?
Just pulling back and acknowledging the fact that something that takes me an hour to write takes him a day to draw.
Yeah, right.
And being mindful of that, so that if he sees a better way of doing it, I don't want to be dogmatic about it. Well, it's not the way I wrote it. Well, as long as we're still telling the same story, it's fine.
Yeah. Now, in between there, didn't you have a Black Widow series?
It was after that.
It was after the Captain America?
It was actually between the 2 years, after Daredevil, before Captain America, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was Chris. Boy, that was Chris.
That was a lot of fun.
That was Chris.
Yeah.
I just hung on for the ride there. Honestly, that was Chris who wanted to do it. It was Chris who did, the co-plotting on it. It was Chris. I would basically just get 20 pages of artwork every month, and I would go, okay, I got to dialogue this. And just letting him do his thing.
Oh, fantastic. That's
Yeah.
great. In many ways, Daredevil almost seems like like a non-Mark Waid character. I would have thought that when you started that series.
Yeah, but here's the thing. This is what made it work for me and why it was fun. Is another thing I do when I take on a book, especially a superhero book, is I think really hard about the powers these characters have, the abilities these characters have. And what is it like to have those abilities every moment of every day? What is your life like when you're like that? With Flash, it was always bearing in mind every moment I wrote that character, what it was like to have super speed and what it would be like to live in that world. And with Daredevil, it was, all right, he's blind. But he has these extra radar senses that allow him to perceive certain things, but not everything. So what is that like on a day-to-day basis? For instance, in every issue of Daredevil, if you go back and look, I made sure that in every issue, there was one moment when his enhanced senses would tell him something that you and I wouldn't know. And there was also one moment where being blind was a huge handicap for him when it wouldn't be. Even if it's something like not knowing what floor of a building he's on.
Right.
And trying to find new ways of making it both an advantage and a handicap at the same time.
Yeah, that's pretty deep into like the comic biz. I think also with Daredevil and a lot of your work, you create very credible, contemporary romances.
Thank you.
Especially that Daredevil seemed like such a contemporary, realistic, lovely romance with the female lead there. Yeah,
well, because the thing is, you have to remember that these characters don't want to be supporting characters in somebody else's story.
Yeah.
They all have their own lives and they all have their own, even your supporting characters have their own lives. You have to remember this as you go. And that helps make them real characters.
Oh yeah, that's a great insight.
Thank you.
Let's shift gears for a minute.
Sure.
I do want to get to another thing.
Yeah.
Here's kind of a Mark Waid thing that you're doing that's so funky and fun.
This is awesome, yeah.
Yeah, what is this book? What is your introduction? What's the story behind it?
So for almost 30 years, Superman was not only a comic book and a TV show and movies and all that, but he was also a newspaper strip. For those of you who remember newspapers,
What's that again?
From 1939 to 1966, there was a newspaper strip that was daily and Sundays.
Right.
And no one has these. Like no one has read most of these, but I, in my continuing quest to have read and consumed every Superman story that there is in any medium that there is.
Even radio, I know you're.
Even radio, all of them. I started trying to collect the newspaper strips, but they're really hard. These are papers that are 50, 60 years old. And on eBay in 2002, I found a guy who had like almost every Sunday newspaper strip. Not all of them, but almost every one. And I paid like $3,000. I mean, I really wanted these so bad. And so I collected more of them. And then for a long time, I was the only human being on the planet. This is true. The only human being on the planet to have a run of those Superman Sunday pages.
Yes.
So IDW was doing Dick Tracy reprints and Little Orphan Annie and stuff, and they wanted to do Superman stuff, but they didn't have the resources. And I heard about this, and I was just talking to one of their editors, and I just happened to mention, I've got all the Sundays, and they're like, wait, say that again?
Yeah.
And so they just took all my Sundays, they scanned them in, and they made these nice set of hardcovers out of them. And I'm just really proud to be part of this. And I get to do the introductions and talk about the individual stories and stuff. And a lot of them are Superman adventures that have never been seen hadn't been seen for 60, 70 years.
Yeah, so brilliant. Like a lot of great Wayne Boring art.
Yeah.
Some Kurt Swan.
Some little Kurt Swan, yeah.
At Ithacon, we have like your compatriot in this archival quest, Sid Pfeiffertig.
Sid Pfeiffertig, yeah.
Yeah, another great guy. And he does a similar thing with you, but with the dailies.
With the dailies, yeah. He's got a ton of the dailies, yeah. Unfortunately, there's still a fistful from like 1952 to 1956 that no one has.
Oh my God.
I've got photocopies of photocopies of photocopies of photocopies that I can read but are not fit for print.
Yeah.
And I wish that, so at least I've read all of them, but I wish we could finally get them all into print. Maybe someday somebody's going to find an unearthed cache of them.
Yeah, I love it. Well, yeah, so much fun. It's such an odd thing. And again, when you talk about your personal industriousness, it's amazing that Holy cow, wait, you're doing this too?
Yes,
You're
too, yeah,
preserving
exactly.
the Superman strips.
And it also goes to my love of Superman, you know.
Yeah, right. Now you do have a very strong love of Superman.
Great loves. I mean, that's my favorite superhero character, my favorite comic book character, with everybody else a very distant second.
Yeah. Right.
And I've always loved Superman, and always will.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me a little bit about with Superman, the notion of his crest, and it's a symbol of hope that seems to really be a strong part of the mythology, and I think that was all you?
That was me. I was very proud of that. I mean, I don't normally say that was me and take credit for my own ideas like that, but I'm really proud of that one, because there's nothing quite as enjoyable to me when you're working on these long-term characters to find that something that you wrote, something that you put into the mix, sticks and has legs, like the Speed Force. Like whenever I watch the Flash on TV and somebody says the word Speed Force, I get all excited. That's me.
That's cool.
And so the idea that the S stands for hope, that came from Superman Birthright.
Right.
That the S on Superman's chest stands for hope, and when I heard it in the movie, you know, that put me over the moon. That was pretty cool. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. I want to get to some questions, but I did have one very serious question for you. I was reading an old Amazing Heroes, and some fan wrote in who was super belligerent.
Yeah.
And you responded, you know, in editorial capacity in the letters pages, and I thought you were very polite, but it was like a difficult situation.
Yeah.
And it made me think about how those situations have existed, I guess, in every type of fandom or professional versus fan setting in history. But can you comment a little bit about maybe the way that things used to be 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, and some of the challenges that the industry faces now with the belligerence and bullying in the industry?
It's hard. I mean, it's very topical, the toxicity of fandom. You guys are great. Love you guys. Nobody here. This applies to no one here. But you all know online, especially on Twitter, there's just a contingent of people who are homophobic, who are racist, who are sexist, who are just horrible human beings who want comics to be exactly like they were when mommy was still alive, basically, and they don't like change. They don't want things to be, they just don't want things to be different. And what's frustrating about that is that when you and I were growing up, the idea was comics were for everybody.
Right.
It's a mass media. Comics are for everybody. And somewhere in the last 10 or 12 years, it's become comics are about me. Comics are for me and only me. So if I've been reading Captain America for 30 years and you do something I don't like, I'm personally offended by you.
Yeah.
And you've got to change it back to the way I like it. And nobody gets good stories that way. And we all know, frankly, that all these characters are going to eventually revert to something you like anyway.
Sure.
But the problem is that these social media is terrific because it allows us as creators to connect with the readership in a way that nobody else does. I mean, not recording artists, not movie stars, not TV stars. Comic book guys are completely accessible and completely available. And what that means is, with the good, becomes a ton of bad, and you get, a small contingent of fans who are just very, very loud, wanting comics to be just like they were in 1972 or whatever, and they can't be. They can't be. It's comics embrace diversity. They always have. They've always tried to, as best they could in the time. One of the great things about the industry, one of the things that I find most exciting about the industry is that, 15 years ago, every comic book was written or drawn by an old white guy.
Yes.
And we have been very lucky to be more inclusive in the last few years.
Sure.
And we've had to be, because the readership is changing, because the demographics of the country are changing. White guys aren't the majority anymore.
Yeah.
There's more voices out there, and there's more people who are hungry for entertainment that are not terribly interested in the problems of old white guys. I totally get that. So we have to start publishing stuff that is more authentic, that reaches out to more readers, that reaches out to a more diverse readership. We have to, or else comic books will go the way of drive-in movies and just vanish. And that means hiring a lot of people who are authentic voices, hiring you know, hiring more people of color, hiring, you know, more LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a valid and a valiant way of doing it. But unfortunately, there's a section of talent, a section of fans out there who are upset that they feel like those jobs belong to them.
Yeah.
Like they're wannabes who think that they're being shut out because we're making all these diversity hires of people who are unqualified, and that's just crap.
Yeah, right.
So that's tough to deal with. That's tough to deal with. And again, most fans are lovely, but this is why, you know, if you're on Twitter, this is why you've seen such a pullback in the last couple of years from comics creators being on Twitter. This is why fewer comic creators are on social media, because the relentless cascade of hate, it just wears on you.
Yeah. Do you find, and you know, I think of creators like Chelsea McCain and some of these folks who really struggle. Do you find that at conventions you get that hate in a small way or any way?
No, because you've got keyboard courage when you're at home.
Yeah,
when you're at home in your boxer shorts and you're writing an angry screed about Captain Marvel and why she shouldn't be a woman.
Yeah.
You know, you got your username, you know, fanboy827.
Yes.
When I've never had an experience so far, knock on wood, at a convention where one of these jerks has come up to me and been actually openly confrontational, nor would they, because that would require courage.
Yeah, I hear you. That's a good place to end my questions. Do we have some questions? Thank you very much for that.
Of course.
Do we have some questions? Yeah.
I was wondering the story behind the Kingdom Come press.
Oh, that was Alex. Alex doesn't get enough credit for Kingdom Come. Alex had all these character sketches when he came to DC, and he had a vague idea. He wanted to do 20 years in the future, and the older heroes had retired, and the younger heroes were kicking around, and that's kind of all he had. And so he and I sat down and molded that into something. But the character designs, that is straight up Alex, and that's, you know, and how do I say this in the most vague way possible? Because the guy we had dinner with, Brandy, he gave the thumbs up to that one thing. So if you like the Kingdom Come Superman costume, this might not be the only time maybe print is not the only time you're going to see it anytime soon. All I can say.
Ooh. Cool tease. Thank you. Do we have another question? Time for another question up here. Yeah. Speaking of the Superman crest.
Yeah.
This fan with hope on his chest. Here we go. Yeah.
Thanks. We talked about how characters are being redone, they're doing rebirth comics and things like that. It's kind of exhausting as a reader to keep up with it. I'm just wondering, as a writer and editor, just how do you keep up with the different backstories and power sets that these characters go through?
It's become almost impossible. I mean, that's not a joking answer. It's become almost impossible because we've rebooted these characters so many times, and their history has become so fluid that at some point you just kind of have to pick the stuff you like that works for you. It's a shame. I don't know it got broken probably before you were born. It got broken in the early 90s because there was a point at which Marvel was putting out so many comic books that no Marvel reader could afford to read all of them anymore. And that shattered this illusion that all Marvel Comics was one big world and one big universe that you could follow. And Marvel never really recovered from that because there's still continuity between the books to some degree, but you don't really see it as much anymore. You don't really, and you're constantly reading Marvel stories where you go, wait, that doesn't jibe with this thing that happened 20 years ago. You got to remember too, that I'm not making excuses. There should be continuity. We really want there to be a consistency in the characters, but you got to remember, man, when these characters were first created, no one dreamed that they would last 20, 30, 50, 70 years. No one. There's been more stories told about Batman than about any other character in fiction in the history of the human race.
Wow.
So keeping up with that and knowing every little bit, especially when they start to conflict and you got to try to make them fit, it's hard. It's hard. We got Tom Brevoort, who's the executive editor at Marvel, who knows as much about this as anybody, and even he makes mistakes sometimes. So, I don't know. I wish we could do a better job of it. There are people like me who care and will read stuff. There's writers who just don't care and who just want to do their own stuff. So, I don't know.
Yeah, good
question, yeah.
One more question. Yeah, okay, last question. Here we go. All right. Here we go, buddy.
Why can't Warner Brothers make a good Superman movie anymore?
That's a great question. That is a great question. Man, Marvel has got the movies covered but can't handle TV to save their lives. And DC has TV covered completely and does an awesome job, but struggles with their movies. The reason DC hasn't yet made a good Superman movie is because the people who were signing the checks and making the big decisions up to a certain point, I don't know if it's true right now, but to a certain point, didn't like Superman. That's just flat out, didn't understand Superman. That's flat out true. I've sat in rooms where Grant Morrison and I have sat with the head of Warner Brothers, explaining Superman to him. And they don't get it because to them, Batman has made $1 billion and Batman is about tragedy and loss and pain and revenge and anguish. So why would you break that formula is what they're thinking. Why aren't all superheroes like Batman? And so they still don't get it. They still, and hopefully they will. Wonder Woman kicked ass. Wonder Woman was a great movie. You know, Aquaman, you know, tried, wasn't as good as Wonder Woman, but I hope that we get further into this. The good news is that with each passing year, comic movies are made less by old white guys who never read comics and made more by people who grew up reading comics and love comics. That's why comic book TV shows exploded in the last few years, because the people who were reading comics when they were teenagers finally got old enough to be the decision makers, and that's what made the difference.
Yeah, that's great. So, Mark, are you saying it's your fault because you were not able to explain Superman well enough to the head of?
Totally my fault, Alan.
Oh, I see.
Because Alan Horn and I couldn't have a meeting of the minds.
Man, well, thanks for nothing.
I know.
No.
Yeah.
Let's end it right here, but we do want to say thank you for everything. Mark, thanks for all the great work. Thanks for your insights today.
My pleasure. Thank you.